As many people in this class as there were yesterday, so good or bad, I don't know, just observation. What that does mean is the people sitting in the back, at some point I may say, come forward, be part of our class.
Only 2 outlets in the room. Sorry.
Oh, so you need to be surfing the internet? That's what you're saying?
Well, I can do that on my phone.
Okay. I'm just joking. Best class you've attended at a conference this week?
SQL Advanced Reporting.
SQL Advanced Reporting. Yeah, fantastic. We're talking about the best class you've attended at a class this week. Advanced Report Builder?
Yeah,
Last one should be best.
Oh, I'm saying what's the best one you've had so far? I mean, obvious. I'm saying the best one, right? We all know that. Advanced Report, who taught it? Was that Joshua?
No, it was a Tanner.
Oh, Tanner taught it. Oh, okay.
And he ripped through it, but
Yeah.
boy, he was just throwing on.
So you must have some good
Let me
stuff.
tell you.
Oh, yeah.
I was gobbling on it.
Fantastic. Tanner started on my team.
And then it's not helping out.
It's wee infancy as a BI intern. So, proud papa.
That was excellent.
That's good. That's good. So advanced reporting was good. What other classes were really good? No other classes were really good?
Sure.
That's terrible.
Training doesn't have to suck. Not according to Mike Christensen, he said that class sucked. Actually, I think his direct quote was this training sucked.
Well, the technical difficulties weren't your problem.
There were some technical difficulties in that. I tried my best to be at least entertaining. All the technical difficulties were gone.
That's always a problem.
Well, so it was set up the exact opposite of last year. I did that same training last year and I had technical difficulties. Because last year you had to route your sound through HDMI and I had plugged in the audio jack and it didn't work. This year, I think you couldn't route your sound through HDMI. So I plugged in the audio jack and tested it and it worked. But as soon as I plugged in my HDMI, then my computer refused to acknowledge that I had the audio jack plugged in. And I kept telling it, no, use the audio jack. Just wouldn't. So I blame Bill Gates.
I think all the advanced classes I've been to, the JDA class was good, Paul Lovelace always has great stuff to share.
Yeah, he does. Were you in his class this afternoon
Yeah, I
or
was
this
there
morning?
this afternoon, that's
He
good.
came out to me just before class, like literally 30 seconds before class, and he just said, hey, I was thinking, could I do a data source for my subdocument?
Oh, yeah, that came from in the class.
And I was like, yes, you could.
Yeah.
Okay. And he
Yeah,
was
he was
super
very excited
excited.
about that.
So that was cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, the BI classes are always really popular.
So that we're all
Good, powerful tools. People enjoy doing those sorts of things. So, let me tell you a little bit about this class then. This is configuring dynamic charging language in JustWare. Now, when I say dynamic charging language, what do you think of? Because I just made that word up.
I think of variables inside of my charging line.
Okay, fantastic. You may think of anything other than that. This is the point yesterday where some guy stood up and walked out of the room. Yeah, variables inside my charging language. Okay, great. So I don't know how this class was billed. At one point, they always like send me emails of my class descriptions and say, hey, does this look right? Not knowing that I don't check email. Not really, but I read an email. I read the email and I responded and said, because I think they had in there, this class is geared for attorneys. And I responded back and I said, I don't know that that's true. It's geared for attorneys. It's also geared for JustWare admins because we're going to get pretty technical of how you set this up. So, you know, if an attorney's in there just wanting to talk attorney stuff without looking at JustWare code tables, it's not the class for that attorney. It's okay, Ken, you can stay. But on the other hand, if there's an admin who really, you know, is going to want to go lock himself in a garage and turn the car on and he starts reading statute language, it might not be the best class for that JustWare admin either. So we're gonna do both. We're gonna talk a little bit about statute language and the complexities of statute language, and then a solution inside of JustWare to set it up. Now, first things first, on the conference website, you know what, I think I might even have enough. On the conference website, there is a zip package. If you go to, the training.udon.com Justice Web, and then click on the conference materials link, there's a zip package there. That zip package has a lot of stuff in it, including these instructions. Okay, this is where something at the back may be to your detriment because I'm handing these out, working my way backwards, and if I run out, I'm going to say I told you so. Not really. I think I have plenty. So,
I'll have an extra one because he's young.
yesterday I think I brought the same number and about half the class got one. So,
Do you have any evaluation books in here?
I have
Filled out ones?
one, I think. Sorry. Let me grab it for you. And since she's here, I do have evaluation slips up front as well. So I'm just going to hand those to you. Take one and pass them on. Give it back.
Do you need more?
I've got a bunch of blanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so what I just handed out, besides the evaluation slip, is a step-by-step instructions for everything we're going to talk about today. How to set up your dynamic charging language, all right? Step-by-step screenshots should be pretty straightforward as far as following this. Now, that is one of the many treasures in the zip package. So that's the first thing, instructions. I've also got a copy of the JWML file, which we'll be using, which there is some JWML work that needs to be set up to do this. I've got the RDL file for the report that we're going to be using, which is embedded into the JWML file out there. JDA data sources with a sample JDA document. Some SQL scripts, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which are life-saving SQL scripts. And I have a copy of this PowerPoint all in that zip folder. So highly, highly encourage you, if you're going to do this, if you're here just to kind of see what it is and you go, I would never want to do that, don't worry about it. But if you plan on ever attempting this, definitely grab that zip file because it will be huge time saver. So with that, and with those caveats, I guess, let's start out talking about the problem. This all originated thanks to Coogee County. Not really, this actually dates back to Deschutes County, right? So a few years ago, I was working on a Deschutes project in Deschutes, Oregon, Deschutes County. And the project was pretty much done. Had everything kind of all ready to go for them. And they asked me to move over and take over one of the project teams, work on a different project. And so I had to offload the shoots to somebody else. But it's okay because the project was almost done. The only thing left was their statute charging language.
Yeah.
So, we were good. I still get beat up by that project team that took that over because it took them like a year and a half to get their statute charging language figured out and done. Well, Deschutes County gets ready to kick their project off, and Kootenai County gets ready to kick their project off, and they had seen Deschutes charging language and kind of like what they saw. And so they started asking me, and now I'm working on, karma, now I'm working on Kootenai County's project, and they want this Deschutes. So I go to the team that took over Deschutes, and I said, what did you do here? And they kind of come up with this parent-child relationship where your statutes, you could have options of the various charging language that you would use underneath your statutes. I said, okay, I can roll with this, and decided I would take it up and I would build on what they had done to create kind of a standard way of approaching the problems of dynamic charging language. So we're going to go through some statutes here. They're all Idaho statutes. Here is the first one, obtaining goods by fraud. And this is obviously not what you would see if you went out to the Idaho State Legislature's website. We've kind of consolidated it and figured out, put it into verbiage that would go into a complaint or an information, something like that. And the attorney in Kootenai who put these all together, bless his heart, was totally inconsistent in the way he gave them to me. So I tried to clean them up, but you gotta know, going through 1,000 statutes and trying to break up the myriad of options and ways and things that they all come together and be consistent from statute to statute, you forget how you did things 200 statutes ago. So I don't blame him at all, but what types of things do you see in this language as you read through it?
Pick list variables.
Yeah, so you said some variables. There's a pick list, all right. So we got pick lists. Just to try and make things consistent, I've broken my pick lists into parentheses with semicolons separated, and here I've highlighted them in red. So just for the purposes of our slides here, anytime you see red with semicolons and parentheses, that's essentially a pick list, a sub-option, a drop-down box, right? And this particular statute has 2 different drop-down boxes that would be available to us. What else do you see? Yeah, so next, immediately after our first pick list, I've got a curly bracket, which was my way of designating, all right, I don't want to build a drop-down list that has every single thing that a person could obtain by fraud, right?
Yeah.
That's just a package of gum. That could be an endless list, and nobody would ever want to maintain that list. Nobody would ever want to choose anything from that list. So that doesn't lend itself very well to a drop-down list. We're going to make some free text available. So we got, in this particular statute, we got 2 things. We've got drop-down options, and we've got free text. We'll go to another statute. So does anybody see anything new in this statute charging language that we haven't talked about on the previous one? What do you see?
Something pulling from the database.
Something pulling from the database. You are light years ahead. So here we have, again, 2 drop-down options. We've got 2 different free text places where we need to fill something in, but as was pointed out, we also have a victim. Well, we don't want the victim to be a drop-down, obviously, and we don't really want it to be a free text because, number one, they'll spell it wrong. I mean, these are attorneys, right? So, kidding. It was a joke. It was a joke. He's going to wish he never came to my class. He's not the one who gave me the statutes, by the way. That was his buddy Barry.
Supervisor, not buddy.
Oh, fine line. Fine line. Yeah, so we don't want to have that be free text because people could spell it wrong. I mean, there's any number of things that could go wrong with that. Plus, beyond that, you've already put the victim in the case, right? By the time you're here, you've already filled out your case of all people. You've already, here's the defendant, here was the victim, here's, the prosecuting agency that's going to be involved, it's going to go to this court, I mean, whatever. You've done that. So why not just pull it from the database? And so in my slides here, we're going to have red be drop downs, green be free text, and orange with the square brackets is going to be database fill points. All right? So moving on to accessory to a felony, we're going to add a wrinkle, and that wrinkle is pretty obvious. What do you see? Options, and I like to call those paths. So in this scenario, rather than just a drop-down box, really I've got kind of 2 different paths this statute could take. If I take option 1, I get some sub-options. I get a drop-down. Option 1 has the attorney's going to have to choose something, right? But if I take option 2, no drop-down. So paths are a little bit different than sub-options or drop-down lists, right? And I've color-coded my paths, so to speak, in blue. So this one would look like that. Now, here again I've got paths, and if we color code, you'll notice not only do I have 2 paths, but the first path is pulling from the database and has some free text. The second path is also pulling from the database and has some free text, but it's pulling different things from the database, so the 2 paths are slightly different. Neither one of them has sub-options, so no red on the screen at this point. Just another little variation of the complexity you encounter in statute charging language. And then just for fun, let's burn something down. So this is arson. What do we add? We've got to be wrinkled here.
Options within options.
Yeah, so now I've got paths and my paths are diverging. I hate Robert Frost. Not really. He only had 2 paths diverging. Now we've got, right? So I've got paths within paths, and within paths, this one's got sub-options, that one's got a totally different set of sub-options, but then inside of that I got sub-paths, and in my sub-paths, this one's got sub-options, that one doesn't have sub-options, and at this point I quit. Done. Please move me off of prosecutors forever. Not really. But this is the problem we encountered. Now, burning stuff down is not the most complicated statute language in the state of Idaho. It gets worse. Kidnapping, murder. There are even some that you wouldn't think would be complicated from a statute language perspective were fairly complicated. So this is not by any means the worst statute we encountered, but it's very illustrative of the problem, right? So we'll move on to the solution.
Well, you've been to Idaho.
I told you it was an Idaho-based PowerPoint.
That's great.
And for the solution, we're going to go to JustWare. And what I'm going to do is show you the solution in action. And then we'll talk about how you actually go about configuring it. Okay? So, up on the screen, I've got a case, Mr. Clark Kent. He's a very bad person. I believe if we went to the agencies that involve parties, Lex Luthor was the victim here, so just worked out that way. And I've got the 5 statutes that we just illustrated in my slides are the exact same 5 statutes here. So all of the complication that we just went through and described as the problem, we're now going to demonstrate how the solution handles that. So to start off with, I mentioned in the zip package there's a Dremel file. It is a copy of this Dremel file, and a few unique things about this Dremel file. So first off, you'll notice right here that I've got a charging language snap-in. That charging language snap-in is the modifiers and enhancers repurposed, and I've just changed the label with my user settings to say charging language. So that is new, and that is parented to my charges up above. So you'll notice as I go through each of these statutes, this section's going to change. When I'm on count 1, it's going to show the charging language options for count 1. When I'm on count 2, it's going to show the charging language options for count 2. We also added this sentence, credit, suspend, condition, etc. down at the bottom. That's just because I usually like to see it there. It has nothing to do with this class, but just so you know, that's there. And then the other thing that's unique to this particular Dremel, which does have to do with this class, is this snap-in up here, which is the charging language preview. And we'll show you that over the course of this training, but essentially that is just a snap-in that houses a report, the same report that's in the zip file out on the training conference website. And that report basically shows you the charging, what I call the charging manual, or the options that are available to you. Essentially what we just went through in the PowerPoint slides. And then on the right-hand side shows you, based on the options you've chosen, this is what your statute charging language would look like. So let's go through and add charging language for each of these statutes. So the first one, obtaining goods by fraud. I'm going to come down to my charging language snap-in. I'm going to click the green plus. And immediately you'll see that I've got 2 options here. Or 2 inputs, I should say. I've got input 1 and input 2. What that means is that it takes both of those to do your statute charging language for this particular statute. It's like two clauses or 2 halves of the paragraph. So input 1, input 2. And you should be able to read these, just kind of read down the list. So I'm going to start with number 1. I'm going to say did sub-option, free text, a value of, okay. So did sub-option. Well, if I come over here to my sub-option field, I'm going to click on that. And I've got some options here. I'm going to say possess. So now if I read that and I use what's in the sub-option field in place of my sub-option tags, I can say did possess. Now I need to do something in free text. So we'll say a new car of a value greater than 300, knowing or having reason to believe. So that's input 1. I did my sub option, I did my free text. Input 1 is done, let's bounce down to input 2. The said property had been obtained by, and I have a sub option here, so let's see, fraudulent use of a financial transaction card or number. So if I read through these then, and I substitute my sub option for sub option and free text for free text, I can read this and say, did possess a new car of a value greater than 300, knowing or having reason to believe the said property had been obtained by fraudulent use of a financial transaction card. That sounds like charging language. Sounds pretty good to me. Let's save that, and we'll go show you how that would then come together over in my charging language preview report. So bounce over to my charging language preview report, and over here you'll notice on the left-hand side in the gray column, I've called it charging manual. That's just what we kind of decided we wanted to call it. Doesn't really matter what you call it, but essentially this is, according to the legislature, this is what your charging language looks like, or these are all the options that are available to you, and it just reads just like my slides did. I've used percents, or parentheses, knew it was a P word. I've used parentheses with semicolons to separate my sub-options. I've used curly brackets for my free text. And then, if we come down here, I've got square brackets for my database fill points and whatnot. So that reads just like my slides, and it shows you which options are available. Well, if you move over to the right-hand side, and the only one we've done so far is count 1. So moving over to the right-hand side, I've got did possess a new car of a value greater than $300, knowing or having reason to believe that the said property had been obtained by fraudulent use of a financial transaction card or number. So it just sucked in my sub-options, sucked in my free text, used my template, and built my charging language and displays it. This is exactly what would show up in my complaint or my information in my charging document. Now, we'll fire off a charging document. We'll finish the other statutes, and then we'll fire off a charging document. And you will notice there are a slight difference. The charging document will include on or about the occurred date, defendant did, that sort of language. Come on in. But the heart of the language here is exactly what would come into my charging document. So let's go over and we'll do the other statutes, and then we'll actually fire off a charging document and take a look. So I'm just going to bounce back to the charges tab here. We'll go down to number 2. When I click number 2, this time I've got 4 inputs. So this statute needs 4 components to complete the charging language. So did falsely and with the intent to sub-options, let's see, defraud another. This one's going to start with the sub-options, so let's go see what that list says. Okay, so I got alter and publish, attempt to pass, a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to say alter and publish. So if I put that in, alter and publish as true and genuine a certain written instrument to wit, and then I need to do something in free text. So my free text is a will. To victim. Well, victim's in square brackets, but we know that's coming from the database. And there's no victim column here, so I can ignore that. The only 2 columns I really need to worry about when I see my kind of tags in my language is sub-option and free text. So we'll ignore victim. We already have a victim on the case. So to victim, well knowing at the time of the sub-options, let's see what my sub-options are. Well, I already said they altered and published, so we'll choose publishing there. Of the said instrument, that it was altered as to the, and this is free text, which I'm just going to say authenticity, and Kim can laugh at me if that's something he would never put in that sentence. He is laughing at me, see?
He's just shy.
All right. He's still laughing at me. We're going to go down to count 3. So here you see a little twist, a little something different. I've got 2 rows here But if you'll notice, I haven't labeled them input 1 and input 2. Here I've got them as input 1.1 and input 1.2. What that means is, if you think back to my PowerPoint slides, we've encountered our first path, right? The blue text, option 1, option 2. That means this statute only has one input that's required, but for that input, I've got two different options. Okay? So in this scenario, whereas all the other ones I filled out each one of them, if it's a 1.1, 1.2, I only need to fill out one, because there's only one input. So I'll just choose one, and we will go with the top one here, which has a sub-option. We're going to say that he withheld from a grand jury. Go down to number 4. And again, I've got a path, input 1.1, input 1.2. So I'm only going to choose one. I'll choose the bottom one this time, which just has free text, it looks like. By lying. Can you laugh at that? No. Okay. Just want to give you a chance. I don't know.
Don't worry.
All right. Don't want to move too fast with humor. All right. Now, coming down to arson. Remember I pulled up arson and said, just for fun, let's burn something down? Because it looked like it was this ridiculously complicated, and all of a sudden I had paths with subpaths and etc. Well, the system doesn't really like subpaths. It'll handle paths, it'll handle sub-options. It doesn't really like subpaths. So what we ended up doing is we broke it into one input, but there's 7 different options. So we'll just choose one of these. And I think I usually like to choose number 4 just because it has a sub-option and free text. So in this case it's arson, so we're essentially defrauding someone. I'm going to choose an insurer. And for my free text, I'm going to say lighting his house on fire. I'm going to try not to hit my trackpad when I do it. And you'll notice that when I did fat finger that, it checked option number 6 as well. So I'm just going to uncheck that. Okay, I'm going to save that case. I've done all my statute charging language. We'll go back to the report here, and now all 5 of my counts. This, of course, never changes, right? This is the charging manual. This is the options that are available to me, so that never changes. But over here now, I can actually read through my charging language on all 5 of those counts and say, is that what I want to do? That's what's going to get pulled into my information, my complaint, whatever I'm filing. Look good? Thumbs up? Looks great? Okay, well let's go to the filing cabinet then, and we'll generate a charging document. Now this is not a real charging document. And I'm going to delete the one that I did from my class yesterday. Except I'm going to actually say yes when I delete it this time. This is not a real charging document. This is the actual document that's in the zip package out on the website. And it contains all of the JDA data sources. So if you just load this into JDA and save it to the database, it'll load all those data sources into your saved data sources. And then it just also has the code for how you might configure the charging language within your charging document. You might do it a little differently. So it's just called dynamic charging. There, and we'll save it. Okay, so like I said, I mean, obviously this doesn't look like a complaint, doesn't look like information would, but it does pull in the code. So the top part just says, hey, by the way, don't delete this document, or the main purpose of it is to contain the JDA data sources. So this has all your data sources that you need, and then this is the code that could be used for inside of your charging. And you'll see it pulls it in, and that's where I said it adds on the 12th of September 2014. Clark Kent did possess, blah, blah, blah. It goes on. Looks like I need to add a space right there in my JDA document. So just like you saw in the report, in my charging language preview, once that charging language preview looks the way I want it to, I can fire my document. It should be good. Now, let's say I need to change something. Let's say Well, first off, let's say I haven't generated my complaint yet. I haven't generated my information yet. I'm on my charging language preview report, and I'm reading that charging language, and I say, oh, you know what? On count 3, that's not what I meant to do, or that's not what actually happened. I need to go back and choose a different sub option. So let's go back to count 3 here, and you'll notice it only shows me the options I chose. So only the options I chose show up. If I want to change it, I can just hit that green plus again. It'll bring back all my options. I can unselect 1.1, select 1.2, and save that. Oh, I can't save it because I got my document open. Let's close my document. And now I've changed it. So I just changed count 3. If we go back to my charging report, now count 3, it has the new charging language. Yeah, that's what I want. Now I can go fire off my charging document. So if you haven't fired the charging document yet, or you haven't created the complaint, the information, then it's just as simple as bouncing back to the charge tab and changing. You know, maybe I chose the wrong sub option, maybe I chose the wrong path. Whatever, maybe I had a typo in my free text. You know, maybe authenticity was a really stupid thing to put in that free text. Whatever the case may be, you just bounce back to charges and make the changes and save the case, and now it's ready to go. Now, again, not being a lawyer, I'm going to say something stupid, but the case starts out in district court. I file my complaint, and then in the course of that case being processed, it gets moved to circuit court. And now I've got to refile. Without dynamic charging language, you've got essentially one option if you want your charging language to be the same, and that is you go open up the document for the complaint that you already have that's sitting in your JustWare filing cabinet, copy the charging language portion of that document, close it, go back to the JustWare filing cabinet, launch a new complaint or information, whatever is appropriate for filing with the circuit court, paste the charging language in over top of what gets generated automatically in that UDA template. Because the charging language lives only in the document at that point, right? You know, if you don't have dynamic charging language set up, then essentially what you do is when you generate your complaint, it pulls something like this in, and then inside of the Word document, the attorney goes through and deletes out the stuff that he doesn't want, or makes the changes that she wants to make, or whatever the case may be, saves the document. Well, that language in that form, based on the changes the attorney made, lives only in the Word document. It's not in the database anywhere. So if I have to refile in circuit court, I can't get that from the database. I have to go back to the document, open it up, copy, paste, whatever the case may be. So with dynamic charging language, if that scenario happens and I now need to refile with the circuit court or whatever,
Or even amend the document.
I just regenerate a new document, and the charging language is already there. It's saved in the database. I don't have to do anything. Just go back to the filing cabinet and say generate complaint. There you go.
The old one's still saved.
The old one's still there. It would be in as version 1, and then you'd have a version 2. Yep. So it would give you versioning. Yeah.
Where on here do you put in the date of the events?
I had that up on my statutes. That
I just
again.
missed that on the screen when I was.
Yeah, it was already preloaded. So let me show you right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that doesn't have anything to do with the dynamic charging language. That's just kind of standard JustWare. And I had it preloaded. So that's the solution. That's how it all works. Let's go back to PowerPoint now. And we'll talk about the configuration. There's a shopping cart thing going on. I should have looked for a shopping cart with no wheels. That was for my first one. Anyway, so we've talked about lots of components here, and there are lots of components that go into this. In this class, we're going to talk about code tables, and we're going to talk about code partitioning. We've already talked a little bit about JDA data sources and Dwiml and reports and some of those things. We're not going to spend any more time on those, but we are going to spend some more time on the code tables and the setting up. Man, I think that notice could go away. Go away. It's been there forever. I kept waiting for it to fade. It's nice that it's on video forever. Mike Saldivar years from now will be like, that was me. All right, so the components that go into this. First off, the statute table. Nothing unique on the statute table. You'd use it the same way you do in any other implementation. The statute text code table, we do have a little unique configuration. There are two options for statute text, two different types of statute text. There's a plain text option and there's a charging language with variables option. And typically, you're going to use one or the other when you set up your statute charging language, if you're not doing this configuration. In this configuration, we're going to use both. In the plain text charging language, we're going to paste the charging manual portion, the gray column, right? What I had on my slides with the person, the parentheses and the semicolons and whatnot. That's going to go in the plain text, because that's kind of the plain text version of it. The charging language is actually just going to house JDA code. It's just going to give JDA instructions of what to do when you're generating that charging document, the plane of the information. And so if I've got one input, then my charging language with variables is actually going to be input1.jda. If I've got three inputs, my charging language with variables is going to be input1.jda, input2.jda, input3.jda. And of course there's code associated with that, the percent square bracket. But from a component perspective, it's input1.jda, input2.jda, input3.jda. The actual inputs themselves are housed in the modifiers and enhancers code table, which is part of the statute group in your code tables. And then the sub options are housed inside of the charge elements code table. And we're going to show you all this. We'll set this all up here in just a moment. But those are the code table components. And here's how those work together. So you've seen it in action already, but to visualize from a JustWare admin perspective how these things work together, your sub options, which are charge elements, feed into your inputs, right? You saw that. Input 1, blah, 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 sub option, blah, blah, blah. So sub options, which are charge elements, feed into your inputs, which are modifiers and enhancers. Those, in turn, feed into your statute charging language, your charging language with variables, right? I said if there are three inputs, it's input1.jda, input2.jda, input3.jda. So this, feeds this, and then that's what JDA uses to pull in the statute charging language. Your actual JDA document uses your charging language with variables to pull in the charging language. So again, your code table components, modifiers, enhancers, charge elements, which are your inputs, sub options, statute text. There's two code partitioning rules. The first one is based on the statute I have selected, obtaining goods by fraud, which inputs should I show? And the second one is based on the input I choose, what are the sub options that need to be in that drop-down list? So two different code partitioning rules. We will show you that as well. I want to say this as often as possible because really I'm just pandering for your love and favor. But one of the SQL scripts that is in the zip package is a script that will do all your code partitioning for you. So you actually don't need to set that code partitioning up. If you've coded your code tables the way we're going to talk about and the way it describes in your packet, then you can just run that script. It'll do all your code partitioning for you, which is the most time-consuming part of this whole thing. So we are going to do a little code partitioning today, again, mostly just so that you fully appreciate me giving you these SQL scripts. But I want you to see how it works and see what goes into it, what's happening behind the scenes. But inside that zip package, there are scripts that'll do a lot of this for you. Other components I mentioned, we've got Dwiml, I've changed user settings, I described those all in the packet and the instructions. JDA data sources, there's a charging language inputs data source, which is unique and built specifically for this configuration. I've also built custom counts, defendant, and victim data sources. And part of the reason for that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, but it's based on limitations of field sizes and things like that. So I've got a custom data sources for those three things. And those data sources are also all in that zip package. So definitely want to get that if you're going to set this up. Obviously, the JDA document, your complaint, your information, and then the charging language preview report, which we've demonstrated already. All right, capabilities and limitations. Talk about that for a few minutes. So first off, on the capabilities side, every statute can have as many different inputs as needed. So in our example, we had a statute with 1, a statute with 2, and we had a statute with 4. I think in the Kootenai statutes, the most we reached was 6. We had one statute or a few statutes, maybe a handful, that had 6 inputs. So if you were going to set up those statutes, you would need to choose all 6 of those options. You can have as many as you want. If you want to have 17 inputs to build your statute language, you can do that. Not a problem. You can have as many as you want. I will say this, if you do have 17, it's going to take some tweaking on the JDA data sources and the report query because it's built to handle 6, up to 6 right now. Doesn't mean you can't tweak that query, tweak the data source, and have as many as you want. And if you're going to have 17, you're going to find a complication. As soon as you get to 10, you're going to find a complication. Actually, I guess 11. You're going to find a little bit of a complication because it's looking for 1 digit on its inputs. So it doesn't mean you can't make that change. You've had advanced reporting, so you can do it. Right now it's built for up to 6. Additionally, so you can have as many inputs as you want. You can also have as many paths for each input, or options for each input as you want. So we had one that was 1.1, 1.2, all the way down to 1.7. I think that might be the most we did in our Kootenai ones, but that doesn't affect the queries at all. So you can have as many paths as you want. You wouldn't need to change anything on your report queries or your JDA data sources. In this example, I've got 1.1, 1.2, and then a 2.1 and a 2.2, and then a single option for input number 3, which is a fairly standard configuration. Again, in the Kootenai, we did 200 statutes, I think, for Kootenai County. This is still, even with all my SQL scripts and everything, this is time consuming enough that you don't want to do it for every statute.
Kish you, looking at this, I could just kish you because, this is, well.
I'll give you a hug after.
I know how much work this takes, because I know how much work it takes for me to do the charging in my case management system that I have. So.
Well, I knew that it was a cool solution and that we would want to use it, and that it has to be well documented. And then in the course of building it, I was like, this is a pain in the butt. I've got to make tools that will make it easier, which is where some of the SQL scripts and things came into play. So I appreciate your compliment. So I guess back to where I was, 200 statutes. Oh, yeah, you wouldn't want to do this for all your statutes. It's not worth it. Statutes that you don't charge that often, don't take the time. You can always manually edit the charging language on a document, right? Don't waste your time setting all this up for statutes that you never charge. Statutes that you charge all the time, or statutes that are really complicated and hard to get right with the charging language, choose 10%, 20%, whatever the case may be, and set this up for those ones. The ones where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck and the most value. That's what you're going to want to focus on. So Kootenai County had 900 statutes, I think, in their statute table. We set dynamic charging language up for about 200 of them. In those 200, there were probably less than 20, I would guess, that had multiple options on multiple inputs. So in my example here, there's 2 options on 1, there's 2 options on 2. That was only maybe 10% of the statutes we did, at most, for Kootenai County. One thing that we did with those though, in that scenario, I've got a path that has started. This second digit, the one after the period, kind of controls my path. So if I choose 1.1, then I should choose 2.1. And if there were a 3.1 and a 3.2, I should choose 3.1 because you kind of already started down that path. And so this second digit says, okay, I'm going down path 1. So look at input 1 for path 1, look at input 2 for path 1, look at input 3 for path 1. And the only reason for that is we found that it helped, well, I shouldn't say we found, I thought it would help the attorneys keep track of where they are in the paths as they diverge and whatnot. So that's where the period 1.1, 1.2 came into play, was to try and accommodate for the fact that you have paths diverging at different points and to kind of help you keep track of which path you're going down. So that's the 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, 2.2. So those are both capabilities. As many inputs as you want for each statute and as many options for each input as you want. Go crazy. All right, next we're going to talk about some limitations. So each input can have only one sub-option, one drop-down list. And likewise, each input can only have a single free text field. So if you remember back to our JustWare screen, we had input 1, and then there was the option, and then the next field was sub-option, and the next field after that was free text. That means I get to do one sub-option, one drop-down list for that input, one free text for that input. As soon as I reach a second sub-option, that means I need to break it up and do a second input. Does that make sense? This bottom bullet, though, is the one exception to, typically speaking, as soon as you hit sub-option number 2, that means you need to be on input number 2. This is the one caveat. That is, if that sub-option it has the same list and is returning the same value, then you could have 2 sub-options within the same input. And I've got an example here. Same goes with free text, by the way. So, did with the intent to defraud knowingly keep or maintain sub-option of credit card sales drafts and used such sub-option, right? It's referring back to the same choice I already made. So if sub-option equaled impressions, if I had chosen impressions from my drop-down list, then I could say did with the intent to defraud knowingly keep or maintain impressions of credit card sales drafts and used such impressions. It's referring to the same answer, essentially. So that's the one exception where you can have multiple sub-option tags within the same input. And the same goes true with free text. You know, if I type whatever little narrative or whatever free text, describe the weapon, if I reference that description twice within the same input, then I can do it in one input. But if I want to reference a different description or if I want some other different free text, then I got to go down to a second input option. Okay. Additional limitations. This is the other reason where you might need to break it into 2 input options or whatever. You've got 255 characters for the text of your input. So this all has to fit into 255 characters. If you hit 256, you got to go down to second input. Now, here's what's the good thing about that. When I started this, I didn't like my 255 character limit. I was like, oh man, it's making me do more inputs, which I don't want to do. But the more I did it, the more I liked doing more inputs because I liked the smaller, shorter inputs that you could just kind of piece together. Okay, part 1 is this, part 2 is this, part 3 is this, part 4 is this. Great, let's roll. Versus a big long text of one input, I thought it was just really easier to kind of see what was going on. And so that 255 character limit, the more I configured this, the more I thought, no problem, it was great. I was keeping my stuff shorter anyway, just because I liked the way it flowed better that way. So 255 characters for the text that the attorney reads when he's choosing that input option. We'll show you this in a second, so it'll make more sense in a second, but additionally, the JDA code associated with that also has to be 255 characters or less, and the JDA code is a little bit more of a space hog than the the tags themselves, sub-option. You know, the JDA code associated with sub-option is longer than just sub-option. And so when you're setting up your inputs, you probably want to keep them at like 230 or something like that, just so that you have room for that JDA code to be inserted. So based on the limitations I just described, these are the color coding I did in my initial slides. What is the one thing up there we can't do? So we can do database. We did that with victim. That's just pulling database fill points into the statute language. But there is a problem up there. I've got sub option twice. In my earlier description, I described it as a sub path, and I probably should have put that up here: option, sub option, or path, sub path. But you can't do sub paths, so the purple has to go away. Everything else up there we can accommodate. All the other components of the charging language we can accommodate. But you'll notice that even though arson had purple when I was breaking it out, right? We still did arson in JustWare. We still accomplished it. We just had to configure it a little bit differently, you know, because we can't do paths with subpaths, and you know, we can't open this up to generations of subpaths and sub-options and whatnot. So we still accommodate it. We just break it into different inputs that way. All right. So with that, it's time to practice.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So, what about prior allegations? What about priors, like,
priors, yeah.
yeah, say, for instance, count one is a felony, and you have a prior prison term that you're gonna allege that on count one. It's gonna increase your sentence.
We didn't really deal with that in this configuration, so give me a second to think about how I would deal with that in this configuration.
Because it's like a parent enhancer.
Right.
But if you had count one and count two were a felony, that prior prison term would,
Does it change the language? Would
It
you tack
doesn't.
on to the end of the charging language and defendant has priors?
yeah, it would go
Okay.
at the end of the complaint document. It would say this prior
Okay.
allegation applies to counts one and two.
Okay. So all this is doing is building out the charging language paragraph. So in that scenario, if they had priors, you could have it flagged as a charge attribute, for example, and if that charge attribute exists, then it pulls in a separate paragraph that gets tacked on at the bottom. You could do, I mean, that's the easy answer, I guess. There's a number of different ways you can handle that. If it's getting tacked on at the bottom, and if it's a separate paragraph in particular, and it says this applies to 1 and 2, like you just described, that's how I would do that. I would just have a charge attribute, and under charge 1, I would say priors on this charge, and under charge 2, priors on this charge, 3, 4, 5, no priors, and then you just build a JDA data source that pulls in language that would be
There are
for that.
charge allegations also. In California, if you had committed a crime with a gun, there are also gun enhancements in addition to the initial charge.
Right.
So, you know, it's not a charge, but it's an enhancement to that charge.
Right, and I'd probably do something similar. I would use
Attribute.
attributes. Because essentially, that's what modifiers and enhancers is kind of built for. I've never seen anybody actually use it for that.
California's great.
Believe me, I know. I'm looking at 4 California courts right now.
Yeah.
No, but in the history of working, all the prosecutors I've worked with, I've never seen anybody use the modifiers and enhancers for what it was intended, which is like gun enhancements and things like that. And largely because
It's cumbersome.
it just doesn't model that way very well. Yeah, so what I would do in that scenario is I would use my dynamic charging language the way we've set it up here, build out the paragraph, and then look to my enhancements. I'd have a separate data source that would look to my attributes to find out which enhancement language needs to get pulled in and which counts need to be referenced within that enhancement. Yep, yep.
Okay.
That's what I would do. Absolutely.
You're just starting this from scratch, though, you didn't come from a different version of JustWare, right?
No,
Okay.
we're just starting implementation. Yeah.
what county are you in?
Solano County,
Okay. So yeah, Derek.
yes.
Yeah, Derek was hovering at my desk every day on
Yeah.
dynamic charging language because of you.
I know, yeah.
That's great. No problem.
Because we already do this in the case management system we have.
Yeah, I showed this, I think I showed this, just, we'll do like brown bag lunch sessions, where people come in at lunch and we'll show a new configuration we've done for somebody that we think might be useful to other people type of thing. And I showed this and like, I need this for Solana.
Yeah.
So,
We went a totally different direction.
oh yeah. Yeah, this is brand new. This is, right now, everybody in Big Can for Community County, they're the only ones with this configuration as of right now.
This
So,
is what we envision. And we haven't started yet. Our first meeting tomorrow, and we
Okay.
envision this.
And
And
who
we
are you
envision
with?
the Snohomish County, Iowa, Washington.
Okay.
And the attributes, that's exactly what we were thinking we would use
Yep.
it for.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm glad we're thinking down the right path.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, that's what I would do, even if you have,
Yeah, we'll come visit.
He
yeah.
did all this with dialogue, so
Yeah.
you put it in,
And that's one way to do it. The problem with that is it only lives in your Word document then. And
Yeah.
you
But
can't-
they shouldn't be able to do it. And I said, yours is a better technology. You need to,
Yeah, you
I'm
just
not
gotta
going to
figure
go
it
back in time. Yeah, I'm not going to go back.
And it,
Yeah.
really what it took was somebody to take the time to figure it out
Yeah.
and then figure out how to make it work well, right? Because you can figure out something that works,
Right.
but then figuring out something that works well enough to be reused and mimicked, and then documenting that and building the tools to support that. I mean, it was quite the investment from Newdom's perspective. And from Kootenai County's perspective, it was an investment in patience because it took a long time to get it finally done. They were very patient with us. But from Newdom's perspective, it was like, well, let's figure out the right way to do this,
Yeah,
you know?
makes it that much better. Yeah.
So we're going to show you how this all comes together now. We've shown you the problem, we've shown you the solution, we've talked about some of the limitations. We're actually going to set some up now. So this is kind of the steps I go through. I'm just going to highlight the steps right now all at once rather than highlight the step, then go show it in JustWare, and then come back to PowerPoint, highlight the step. I'm going to go through all the steps, and then we'll go do the steps inside of JustWare. So first thing I like to do, because it all revolves around the inputs, and the most time-consuming part of this, given the SQL scripts that are out there, the most time-consuming part of this is figuring out how many inputs is that statute charging language? Is it 2? Is it 3? How would I break that up? And getting those entered into the system is the most time-consuming part, and that's really what it revolves around. That's the first thing I like to do. I've got 2 fields on here. We'll show you those in just a second. Second step, I like to then, while it's fresh in my mind, I like to go add my sub-options for my drop-down list, right? Third, I'll add the statute. A lot of times your statute's already there, but if you haven't added the statute yet, I'll add the statute. And then while I'm on that statute page, I'll also add the charging language, which is, again, the plain text kind of charging manual, and then the JDA code associated with it, the JDA code the JDA is going to use. The second component of setting up the code partitioning of it is, well, setting up the code table portion is the partitioning. And I described the 2 rules. One that says, based on the statute, show these 4 inputs. Based on the input, show these sub-options. Those are the 2 rules. So we're going to go set those all up for this statute. And at this point, we're going to end the PowerPoint for a second. So, again, this is an Idaho statute, but I pretended I was the legislature, and I created an entirely new chapter to Idaho Statutes Annotated, which is XX. Really, I just took a statute and changed the code so I could have something to work with. So, the legislature got together, and in section XX, chapter 101, they have said that it's apparently illegal to exhibit a deadly weapon. We want to add this to our JDA database, so my first question to you is, how many inputs are there in that statute language, and where would you break them up if there are more than 1? You say 2. Why do you say 2?
You got a pick list and you've got an input.
Okay, I've got a pick list and I've got a free text. That is an excellent train of thought. That is a wrong train of thought.
Okay.
Yeah, each input can have both a pick list and a free text. You get a sub option and a free text inside of each input. So this really only has one. Now, if there were a second pick list down here, I'd need two. So, just one input on this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this text. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go inside JustWare. And I am going to open up my system administration, code tables, statutes, and remember my inputs are stored in the modifier and enhancer code table. So I'm going to open that up. And I've got a bunch in there. You can see I'm going to add a new row. And this is important. The code for my input is my statute code. That's what links and tells code partitioning which inputs to bring in for that statute. So this code has to match my statute code. So if it's 18-403 parentheses C.
And just the code number, not penal code or health and safety code, just the number.
Just the code number, yeah. It's whatever is in your statute code table inside of JustWare, which you haven't seen yet. So let's go do that. Before we'll deviate here a little bit. We'll go do that and then we'll come back. So I'm going to open up a second system. It's not going to let me though. All right, we're going to go backwards. I'm going to open up a second system administration here, and code tables and statutes. And this time, instead of modifiers and enhancers, I'm actually going to choose statutes. And I'm going to click the green plus because I know I'm adding a new one, and this is XX 101. So that's probably a bad illustration since it's at the bottom of the list, but if I scroll up, I mean, that's the statute code. So 37-2734A3. Do that one, right? Your code can be anything. In Kootenai County, we actually did something interesting, something I had never done before. Let me see if I can find an example. Probably all up in the 18s. Yeah, there's an example. So they had statutes that were charged in combination. You know, 187603 was always charged in combination with either 76041 or 76042. So the statute code is actually the combination of the two. That combination is what you're charging. So we did those as a kind of a separated list. I don't know if that's because that's the way they're listed in Idaho code, or if that's just what we came up with. But that came from Barry, and I asked him. I said, "Does that mean this statute language applies to both of those statutes?" And he said, "No, that means that that is the code. To charge it, it requires both of those codes, right?" So I had never seen that before. That's what we did.
We have several.
Okay. So so back down here at the bottom, I'm adding a new statute. I've put in my statute code XX101. We'll go back to my PowerPoint and grab exhibition of a deadly weapon and paste that into my description. Now that's really all I need. For search purposes, I'm going to put in here the short description as well. And I'm just going to make it match my description. You could have something different if you wanted. I could fill out, the severity. Is it a misdemeanor? Is it a felony? Is it an infraction? I could fill out, the fact that it comes from the state of Idaho. There's any number of things I could fill out. I'm just going to fill out those two for the purposes of our training here. And then I'm going to add the statute text. Well, we'll come back to statute text. Again, we're doing this a little bit out of order, just so I can illustrate the code. So I put that statute in, I put the code as XX-101. So for my inputs, they also need to be XX-101. So I will do input number 1, sorry. Input number 1, and then I need to go grab my language, which is did exhibit, etc., all the way to there. I left the period off, you'll notice, when I copied that. That is totally optional. That was one of those where I was pulling a Barry and being totally inconsistent as I went through the hundreds of statutes we were doing. I included the period, I didn't include the period, because there's about 5 different places where that period can be added in the course of this. And so I finally went through and removed all the periods, and I put the period in the actual statute charging language code table instead. Otherwise, you end up with like 17 periods at the end, because each component is bringing in the period, you know. So I put it in the statute charging language. So I'm going to copy this code, and I'm going to paste it into what I have labeled as the plain text column. Now, you'll remember I said that one of the limitations that we have is that we only have 255 characters. The 2 places where that applies is this column and this column, my plain text column and my JDA column. So if I've got more than 256 characters, no problem. I just find a good breaking spot and I break it into 2 inputs.
You have to split up your charge for some of those longer charges.
You don't split up your charge, you just split up your language. So I could say, in the presence of 2 or more persons, comma, and then I could bring everything from in a rude, angry, or threatening manner and just put that in as input number 2 for that charge. So then that one would have 2 inputs.
Some of them aren't like paragraphs.
Exactly. And that's where you're going to have maybe 6 inputs to accommodate all of the text. But again, when I did that first demo, you just read right down, right? So I actually kind of like them being shorter and being able to break it up.
Just grabbing
It's
a
easier.
sentence at a time or something like that.
Whatever. I mean, whatever makes sense, whatever flows. Typically, if I'm not buttoned up against my 255, I'm not going to break it up just for the heck of breaking it up, just for the sake of breaking it up. But I kind of like the fact that the 255 makes me break it up so that my single input isn't a whole paragraph at a time, you know? And I find that most of the time you've got sub options or free text or something happening there that's kind of causing you to break up those big paragraphs anyway. In my experience. Okay, so we are within our 255 characters on this particular field, and the reason I know that is because it brought the whole thing in. If it had cut off in the middle of necessary, for example, I'd be like, oh, I butted up against my 255 character limit. So after you paste that in from wherever you're pulling it, you know, maybe we built a spreadsheet and kind of configured all of our parentheses with semicolon type formatting in the spreadsheet, and then pasted them in here. So I'm not up against my 255 character. I do need to change a couple of things though. So I'm going to go, I just hit the home key to bounce to the front. And I don't want to have these options in my dropdown. I actually want to reference and tell the user, choose something from the sub option list. So I'm going to change those options. So I just replaced the parentheses with the semicolon list with the tag sub option. Now, I'm going to do the same thing here with my curly brackets. My curly brackets, I want to say that they need to put something in free text. Now the question I have for you, does describe weapon, is that something you want in your free text helper, or is it kind of go without saying, just say free text, and based on the reading of it, a deadly weapon to wit, they know that they should describe the weapon? You think just leave the helper text in there?
I would,
Okay.
for my people.
And again, the only reason you to even think about it is that you've got a 255 character limit.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And any help is good help, you know,
Yeah.
when they're flying through the charging, yeah.
So I'll leave that in. And there you go. So the plain text portion of this one is done. We copied in our language and we replaced our sub option list with an actual tag that says sub option, and we replaced our free text curly brackets with a tag that says free text, and we left the helper text in there that says, oh, and by the way, when you're typing free text, please don't type the preamble to the Constitution. This should be describing a weapon, right? So that's done. Now, this next bit is putting in the JDA portion, because JDA needs to be able to process this code. So I'm going to just highlight what I just put in, copy it. I'm using shortcut keys for that, so if anybody's freaking out, that's Control-C, Control-V. It's not magic. And the JDA for this is %, square bracket, input 1, and the reason it's input 1 is because I'm on input 1. If I were on input 2, it would be input 2. Dot sub option, so that one's good. I'll go do free text, that's very similar. %, input 1, dot free text, and then in JDA we don't need the helper text because JDA doesn't need any help. So we'll delete the helper text. We'll save it. Okay, so that statute language was only one input. We put the input in, we did the JDA. From that perspective, it's ready to go. We still need to do the sub options, so we'll go do that in a second. And I still need to put my statute charging language in, so we'll do that in a second as well. But I want to tell you one thing before we move on. So I put this in, then I copied this over, and I changed out my tags with JDA code. You don't have to do that. There's a script in the zip package that does that for you. So you just go in, put your inputs in, just worry about the plain text field, break them up, put them in the way you want them. When you're all done, you just run that script, takes everything from this column, pushes it to this column, goes through and replaces all of the tags with the appropriate JDA code, looks for which input it should be, references the right input, does all that JDA work for you. Okay? So, I told you I was going to show you everything the hard way, then tell you what I've done with the SQL script so that you would love me more.
You're saying it won't remove the helper words though?
No, it does.
Yes,
It's
okay.
smart enough to remove the helper words. Yeah. So you can leave whatever helper text you want in that free text, you can leave that in there. Now, I will tell you, don't put helper words on sub option. Number one, you shouldn't need it.
Right.
Number two, the script does not look for that. So, but it does look for helper text on free text, and it says, okay, grab the free text, delete any helper text, and then replaces it with the appropriate input, etc. All right, so our input's done. Let's go out and do the sub options. Those are in code tables, cases, charges, and elements. All right, now here, a couple things about this. So first off, the code column in statutes, don't frown. Have I let you down yet? The code column in statutes is referencing the code from the AOC, the legislature, whatever, right? Here, this is a JustWare code table, so the code column has to be unique. I can't have multiple XX-101s here. So we've pushed that code, because it's still the link, we've pushed that code just into the notes field. Second thing about that, you'll notice some of these notes are ridiculous, which is, I'm assuming, why you were frowning. Rather, like, for example, the term use, it would be something that might appear in how many statutes? I mean, how many times is that a sub option? Use happens all the time. Rather than have 27 uses in this code table, we really want to just have one use. So what we've done is we've just appended all the instances where use, I shouldn't use use, that's terrible. All the instances where C's gets used.
Where it's an option.
Where it's an option. Everywhere where C's is an option, we've appended it into this notes column. Now,
So then what happens, if you create a code where C's becomes another option, does it just automatically show up on that list?
that's what I was just going to say. So I could create, well, for example, use is already in the database. So I have a couple options. Our first, well, draw, let's say draw, I think it's draw. Okay, so draw is already in here. So I could just come to draw, if I sorted this by description. I don't know why zero's in there. I don't know, it's error somewhere along the way. Either somebody fat-fingered 0 over top of the option that was there, or somebody fat-fingered another option that should be there. So that's just user error somewhere along the way. So the word draw is an option. It's available on a couple different inputs. I could just tack on the new XX101 here. For the purposes of our class, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to create a new. So draw will be in there twice. However, in the zip package, there's a SQL script that dedupes this list for you. It says, okay, well, go find all the instances of draw that are in this list and concatenate their note fields together so that I only have one draw and it pushes. So I didn't do all of this. I wrote a script that does all of this. So the separator here is a space, colon, space, which is in your instructions. So anytime you see space, colon, space, that means, okay, now we're to the next input, now we're to the next input. But if I were setting this up, I don't know, I go back and forth, because this list can get pretty unmanageable if you have 27 draws and 54 uses. That list can get pretty unmanageable. On the other hand, finding it and then coming in and tacking it on can be unpleasant. So whichever one you want to do, just add a new draw or just tack it on to the end of the old draw, whichever one you want to do. If you do add a new draw, there's a script that'll clean it up for you at the end. So the biggest thing there is do whichever method you want, but then make sure you run that script, because chances are you're going to be like very black and me, and you're not going to be consistent in the way you did it. So,
I just get a script run every couple weeks.
yeah. So we're going to add a new one. And the biggest reason for that is it'll be a lot easier for me to delete. And I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as my code, and it was draw, and my notes are going to be XX-101, and then I've got a tilde, well, I've got a tilde if I press the right key, tilde 1. What that means is it's statute XX101, and it goes with input number 1. That's the tilde. Tilde 1 means input number 1. All right, I'm going to quickly add a couple other ones. We're going to run really short on time, actually.
It's okay, we'll stay.
You'll stay? Okay. All right, so my code here is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, just to make something up. Draw exhibit, so we'll go exhibit. And XX-10 what?
1.
Tilde what?
1.
Aha! Trick question. It's tilde 1. Because it's not the second input option we're putting in, it's which input does it belong to. So it's tilde 1. Yes. All of this, by the way, is an evolution of idea, right? You start working it, you start building the config. You're like, oh, now what am I going to do? This is different. All right, well, let's put a tilde in there. Now let's do dot 1.1, 1.2. So yes, tilde 1 means input number 1. So there's going to be 3 options on that input. They're all going to have the notation XX-101 tilde 1. So let's do the third one here. And we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. And it was use, and it's XX-101 tilde 1. Okay? So we built my sub-option list. So now I've got all the components. I got my statute in place. I've got my, I don't have all my components, by the way, I lied. I've got my statute in place. I've got my inputs in place. I've got my sub-options in place. I'm missing one thing. Anybody want to guess what that one thing is?
Free text field.
No, because I don't have to do anything for free text. That's just a notes field. What I'm missing is my statute text fields, right? So the first thing is going to be my plain text, and what goes there?
The manual language.
Manual language, yep. So just whatever's in my PowerPoint here, or however you want to format your charging manual. And I said that I put my period in my statute text. That's just how I chose to do it, so that I would end up with 27 periods. And then the second statute language that I need to fill up is my charging language with variables, and what goes there? JDA. And I said the JDA already. It's percent, square bracket, input 1, dot, JDA, square bracket, period. So what this does then, the JDA document says, pull in, for this statute, pull in the charging language with variables. So it says, okay, well, I'm going to drop that in. Well, that says, go get whatever's in the JDA column of input 1 on this charge. So it then goes back to here and says, all right, well, here's input 1 for that charge, and the JDA column is this, and then that gets replaced with this. So it replaces, go grab the charging language with what's in the charging language. Then it replaces what was there with this, and then this is actually the JDA code. So it's kind of a 3-step process to get to what you want to do. All right, we've got to do one more piece, and then we can go do that. Then we can go do that. We can go use that charge on our case. That's the most unpleasant of pieces. Anytime you're doing code partitioning with statutes, it's a little bit of a time-consuming process, and here's why. We've got 900 statutes. Of those 900 statutes, we did 200 charging language. Let's say the average input/input options is 4 or 5. But then the average sub-options within those is, again, 4 or 5. Well, now I've got 800 times 4 or 5 times 4 or 5, the permutations of all the data that it has to sift through to give you the various options is a little complex. So number one, it's a little slow from a performance perspective. And number two, it's a pain in the butt to sift through all those options. Which is why, again, in your zip file, you've got a script to do this for you. But just so you see how it works, I want to show it to you today. So, first thing I did, I highlighted my criminal attorney view. That's the screen that I'm using. And then down below that, I get a list of all the scripts or all the code partitioning rules that govern that view. Now, my 2 California prosecutor agencies, have you even had admin training at this point? I guess maybe you had it here. Oh, you're in Washington. Washington.
Yeah, the admin training, I had it now
Okay.
a year ago.
I don't want to be freaking anybody out with code partitioning. Do you know what code partitioning is?
I saw a little bit of it.
Okay. I didn't want anybody wondering what the heck's going on here. So, essentially this rule, these 2 rules that say added via script, because they were added via script, this is what they do. The first one says, okay, based on the statute that I select, only show these modifiers and enhancers, which within dynamic charging language we call inputs. So based on the statute, only show these inputs. The second one says, based on the input, only show these elements, which in dynamic charging language we call sub-options. So that's what those 2 rules are doing. We'll go over and do those real fast. It's going to take it a second. And I memorized my statute ID so that I can find this faster. It's 1359. I thought. Seriously, it's not.
There's 101 right there in the middle of your screen.
Yeah, it's 1661. It was 1359 yesterday. All right. So I've got 2. Here's my XX101. So this one is the statute, and this one is the option that goes with it. And you can tell that just by looking at it, right? So I'm going to select, since I'm on the rule I have highlighted is statute to input option, I'm going to select my statute on this side. And then on this side, I'm going to unselect everything, and I'm going to grab only the input that is associated with it, which in this scenario actually isn't too bad or too hard to find because it's right there, 1361. So just select 1361 over here. And then I'm going to come up, well, yeah, I'll come up here, I'll do my other one first. So now I'm going to do my other rule, which is, okay, based on that input, which I know is 1361, so let me go down and highlight that. 1361.
If you were to hit the little triangle up in that column or hit that statute ID text at the top of the column, would it reorder it in number?
Yeah. Well, it's ordering it in number, but it's really it's considering it text, which is why 13 was in the ones rather than at the very bottom. Yeah. And there we go, okay. So I've now chosen my input. I'm going to unselect all the sub options because I don't need all of them. I really just need these top few. Draw, exhibit, and use, right? I'm going to select those. And the only reason those were at the top was because I coded them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. I mean, if you were using some other naming convention, they could be anywhere, and you'd want to sort by the description and go alphabetically to find them. Okay, my code partitioning is in place, so I'm going to go back to my case. I'm going to refresh, and I should be able to choose that statute. So I'm going to add account 6, XX101, hit tab, came in perfectly, that's nice. I'm just going to hit the space bar to choose today's date for the occurred date. Anytime you're on a date field in JustWare, space bar will do today, which isn't very realistic in this scenario, but it's easy. So. And when I clicked the green plus, the gods smiled on me, and I only have one input rather than 900 and however many are in the database. That means my code partitioning worked. So I read through my input, did sub option. Okay, well I got to choose something from a sub option. So let's go over there and see if the gods smiled on me here. They did. I only have 3 options. I'll do exhibit, and then I've got free text where I'm supposed to describe the weapon. I'm going to say a Swiss Army knife, just because it will be funny. To wit, a Swiss Army knife. Okay. Save that. And we'll just bounce over to my charging language preview. And did exhibit a deadly weapon, to wit, a Swiss Army knife, in the presence of 2 or more persons in a rude, angry, or threatening manner, and not in necessary self-defense. Perfect. Well, we did it. So that's it. That's the steps. Now, that's the steps bearing in mind that I showed you the hard, painful, make you want to go jump off a cliff way, right? The easier way is that you really only have to do the one column, plain text, and then you got scripts for everything else. You've got scripts to push from plain text to JDA. You've got scripts to do your code partitioning. So I guess you have to do the one column, and then you have to put in your input options. You got to put the code in. And then everything else is scripted. So with that, we're going to go back to PowerPoint. And we'll finish up here with just a little bit more practice. We're not going to put these all in. But if we were going to do this, how many inputs do you see? 3. Okay, so where would input 1 be? Party board? Handle use operate. So where would you end it? So it's going to start with did, and how far is it going to go?
To a comma, in a.
Yeah, to a comma basically. You could go to NA, but I kind of like to keep clauses together. Prepositional phrases, right? So I would probably end it at the comma. And then in a reckless, careless, negligent manner, thereby maybe wounding, injuring, where would you break up for input 2? You would do manner?
Or thereby.
That's where I would do too. I wouldn't do thereby. I'd do it here. I just think it flows better. It doesn't matter. You do it either way. But I'd probably break right there for number 2. And then this is number 3. Mayhem? How many inputs do you see here? Okay. So you see 1. Do you agree?
I have a question. So if you have free text in the first section without an input,
Without a drop down?
drop down,
Yeah.
is that 1 right there? Because you have to do a free text first?
Well, but it's his or her, it's a choice.
No, but his
Yeah,
or hers coming
specify
out,
member.
the victim and his or hers coming out of the database, so just specify member is text. So
Yeah.
you don't have a drop down beforehand, so.
Well, is it his or her coming from the database based on the gender of the defendant?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it would. So what I would do on this one, I've got free text here. I've got a free text here. I've got a sub option here and a sub option here. So what I would do is the did unlawfully and maliciously would go with each of these, but I would do this as 1.1. Did unlawfully and maliciously with this would be 1.2. Did unlawfully and maliciously with this would be 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. So you were right, we only have one input, but we have 5 options for that input, 5 paths. Okay, perfect. And then this one, how would you break it up? I have a brave soul in the back. Was that a hand raise or was that a please, please, stop now. One and choices? Okay. You're on the right path. So with this one, what I would do, this would be my input number 1. It has a sub option, right? And then it's got some database fill points that it's doing. But because it has a sub option, and this has a sub option, I know I'm at least 2 inputs, right? So this would be input 1. This I would do as 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. So I've got 2 inputs. Input 1 only has one option, it's that first paragraph. Input 2 has 3 different options available. With 1, 2, 3.
2, 1. Yeah.
Yep. So input 1, input 2.1, input 2.2, input 2.3. This is the hardest part.
Figuring out which way to do it.
Figuring it out, yep, because they're not going to be nicely formatted like this for you, right? You're going to go out to the legislature's website where dreams are killed. And you're going to have to break it in and say, okay, well, how are we going to, and I would recommend, as a first step, go to the legislature's website, kill your dreams, and format it this way. Okay, well, sub option, and try and build a format that works. And if you can separate, okay, it looks like we got paths. Identify your paths and number them, 1, 2, 3. You know, and that will then help you figure out how to break it up into inputs when you get ready to do it in JustWare. So if you can figure out a formatting that works for you, knowing the components and knowing the capabilities and limitations, figure out a formatting, note the statutes that you're going to build, format them that way, and then use that format to say, okay, now let's go translate that into inputs inside JustWare. Just a little bit of additional information. We talked about the zip package. All that's in the zip package. And there's the website again for those who came in late, missed it. It's not in your packet because I didn't have the address at the time that the packet was created. So we can sort of write that down.
Isn't that on the website?
It's on the website. Well, you can get to it. I don't know. It's trainingconference.com/JustWare. I think that is the website. That's it. So definitely go grab that if it's something you're going to tackle because it will make your life immeasurably easier. Any questions? Sorry, do I need to go back? Everybody get this? Anybody still need this? Okay. All right, so I can stick around and answer any questions. I know that was a ton of drinking from the fire hose as far as setting this stuff up.